Luca was one of those professors who never raised their voice, but still managed to make themselves heard. He was 55 years old and had dedicated his entire life to school, to children, to culture, and over time, he had become a point of reference for many. He was not strict for the sake of being so, but he firmly believed that without commitment, no child would ever truly know his own value. For almost 30 years, he had taught literature in a high school. He did it with passion, with dedication, with the deep conviction that every boy, if stimulated in the right way, could bring out the best in himself. Over the years, he had seen hundreds of students pass by, some brilliant, others in difficulty, but all in some way left a mark. Matteo, one of his students, was in third grade, 16 years old, a head full of dreams that were perhaps too loud and a desire to commit that always seemed to be postponed until tomorrow. He was often late. He sat listlessly at the back of the class, and during class he was more interested in his cell phone than in the words of Dante or the poetry of Ungaretti. Luca had tried, not once, not twice, but dozens of times. He had spoken to him privately. He had tried to understand what was behind that apparent disinterest. But Matteo limited himself to smiling vaguely, to promising improvements that never came. His grades, inevitably, were low. In class, he disturbed, commented out loud, sometimes laughed during explanations, attracting the attention of his classmates and breaking the rhythm of the lesson. Before continuing, subscribe to our channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our stories. Luca, even with patience, could not ignore all this. He continued to evaluate honestly, without discounts or favoritism. Every time he put a 4 or 5 on the register, he did it with bitterness because he knew that Matteo had potential. But without commitment, the potential remained only an unrealized possibility. One afternoon, Matteo's father opened the electronic register. He rarely did so, trusting his son, but that day he decided to check. What he saw left him speechless, a long series of negative grades, almost all in Italian. 4, 5, even a 2 in a written test. Next to it, disciplinary notes that spoke of disrespectful behavior and constant distractions. In an instant, anger took over. Without asking her son for an explanation, she picked up the phone and looked up the school number. The next day, she showed up at the entrance without an appointment. She wanted to speak to the Italian teacher right away. Luca was notified during recess. When he saw him arrive, he immediately understood that something was wrong. The man was tall, with broad shoulders and a hard look. She greeted him coldly and sat down in the empty classroom. Without even sitting down, she began, "I don't understand why my son is treated this way. You are humiliating him in front of the whole class with these grades. Is this the way to teach?" Luca looked at him calmly. "I'm sorry you perceive it that way, but I evaluate what I see. Matteo doesn't apply himself, he doesn't study, and he often disrupts class. I'm here to help him, not to punish him, but I can't invent grades he doesn't deserve." The man clenched his fists. "Maybe you have a problem with him. Maybe you're prejudiced. If you want, come to class. Attend one of my classes. See with your own eyes, and then we'll talk about it." Matteo's father seemed taken aback. He hadn't expected the invitation. He was ready to argue, to attack, but not to observe. Yet, after a few moments of silence, he nodded. "Okay, I'll be there." The next day, the man showed up at the right time. He entered the classroom and sat down in the back, in silence. Luca began the lesson as usual, talking about Pirandello. The boys were attentive, except Matteo. After 10 minutes, he picked up the phone. He began to write, then to giggle with his classmate. He never raised his hand, he didn't take notes. And when Luca asked him a direct question, he responded with an ironic phrase that made half the class laugh. The father watched him, motionless, his face tense. At the end of the hour, he waited for the boys to leave. Then he stood up, looked Luca in the eye and said, "You were right." He didn't add anything else and left the classroom in silence. In the following days, something changed. The father began to talk to his son differently. He no longer defended him regardless, but asked him to account for his behavior. He took away his cell phone for a few weeks. He made him face his responsibilities, and above all, he began to collaborate with Luca. Matteo initially reacted badly. He closed himself off. He appeared even more listless. But then, little by little, he began to change. Luca noticed this when, one morning, he saw him arrive with a book under his arm. It was the first time. He began to ask some questions, to take notes, to intervene timidly during the lesson. One day he handed in a written essay. Luca read it carefully. It wasn't perfect, but it was sincere. In the text, Matteo told how, for a long time, he had thought that the problem was with others, with the professors, with the parents, with the rules. But now he was beginning to understand that he too had responsibilities, and that perhaps it wasn't too late to change. At the end of the paper, it was written, "Thanks to those who had the courage to make me open my eyes, even when I didn't want to see." Luca held his breath. He didn't rush to grade. He reread that essay 3 times. Then, with a blue pen, he wrote just one word: "Well done." Over time, Matteo improved. He didn't become the first in the class, but he stopped being the last. He began to respect the silence of others, to listen, to get involved, one step at a time. At the end of the year, Matteo's father came back to school again. But this time, it wasn't to complain. He asked to see Luca, and when he found him, he held out his hand. "Thank you for not giving up, and for not changing your grades just to make an angry parent happy." Luca smiled. "Thank you for deciding to actually look." That evening, returning home, Luca sat down at his desk and opened the notebook where he wrote down the special moments of his career. He wrote, "Sometimes a low grade is not a punishment. It is a signal, but it takes courage to listen to it, and even more courage to transform it into an opportunity for growth. Today, a father and a son both took that step, and I am proud to have accompanied them." Did you like this story? Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching the video till the end, and see you next story.